Rajesh, it's up to you, from India to Europe.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. How many billions you have? No, Europeans or Germans are not allowed to ask that question, but we, from the outfield, can. I want to talk about several streams of policy issues in this partnership from the experience that we have. Last month, in about last 6 weeks, there have been two very interesting movements in Asia. There has been a struggle around food prices and food rights in Indonesia. And there has been an anti-nuclear movement in southern India, where fisher folk have been organizing to resist the construction and operation of a nuclear plant. In the Indonesian case, the research problem was defined as high oil prices, inability to provide deficit financing by public exchequer, balancing the budget of the government, and therefore food prices must go up, and therefore some people should not have access to food, in which case they will do rioting on the streets. In the Indian case, the nuclear technology was imported from Russia. Plant has been in construction for 12 years. Fisher folk have been fighting because their land and their fishing rights. Well, this is a plant on the sea. And the reason you have these plants on the sea is because they need a lot of water in effluent and accretion, as you know. The movement had died down till tsunami happened in Japan last year. And the nuclear waste and nuclear plant went berserk in Japan. So these fisher folk got very upset, and they thought that they had also faced the 2004 tsunami without nuclear problems. Now they said this is going to contaminate our generations. So the movement intensified. Our Prime Minister sent a heavy-duty scientist team, including our former president, Dr. Kalam, who said, it is all very safe, we have analyzed it, thank you very much, movement is not needed, let's move on with the construction of plant. When the movement persisted, our Prime Minister, of course, has several PhDs from Oxford, Cambridge, and elsewhere, very learned scholar. He said, these fisher folk are being instigated by NGOs who are funded from Europe and North America. The Department of Science, Technology, and Nuclear Energy in most ministries in Asia are in the Prime Minister's office, and their budgets are not discussed even in democratic parliaments. So the first question is democratic accountability of science and technology, even in those places where at least a facade of democracy exists in the form of political governance. We are not yet talking about Myanmar, China, or other such locations. This issue, therefore, of democratic accountability is fundamental to our exploration of partnership between the scientific community and research. I am sitting here since morning, and the presentation made by my colleague from European Union and Henk Mulder's great project, PRIPAS, this is all music to my ear. Because in my part of the world, we are now chasing 8 to 9% annual economic growth rate for more than a decade. As Claudia said, it is called TINA factor. TINA means there is no alternative but growth. In order to sustain that growth, there have to be certain policies, including research policies. And those research policies are embedded in the perspective of making our economies more competitive globally. Therefore, more patents, more products, more markets. Knowledge economy is on the ascendancy. Several of our countries have set up knowledge commissions. Knowledge commissions don't talk about anything else but competitive knowledge economy. They don't talk about knowledge society. The discourse on knowledge in our region is not embedded in knowledge society. So all the music I have been hearing since morning is alien in our part of the world. Our research councils, our research funding mechanisms continue to demand empirical research where results can be predicted 5 years in advance. Your research methods and tools should be designed a priori, even before you start the research. That is the methodology, that is the vision of science, that the meaning of research that is being funded, propagated in our policy-making context. Now contrast that for a moment to what 2008 GUNI report, the Global University Network for Innovations, GUNI report in 2008 produced. It was higher education and human and social development. That was the theme. If you read that report, you find that in the last 20 years, the most pressing human and social development issues were brought to the attention of policymakers by the work of civil society, be it on gender discrimination, be it on poverty eradication, be it on social cohesion, be it on ecological destruction, be it on water harvesting, including be it on mines after the war is over. So, the reason it is important to read that GUNI report and bring this perspective here is to ask the question, where does knowledge reside in our societies? And if I may suggest humbly, universities are only one of many such sites. If we believe that university and research institutions are the only sites of knowledge production, then it will not be transaction and engagement, it will be transmission. And if we believe that the kind of knowledge and science we fund and produce, then we are excluding various cosmologies of knowledge. In the discourse today, people are asking the question, is indigenous knowledge, is practitioner knowledge, is experiential knowledge, is wisdom, as one of the professors in the morning said, having any meaning or not? Unfortunately, garlic pills are marketed, but garlic is not seen as healthy eating. My grandmother's turmeric treatment is now marketed as an antiseptic cream. When it is marketed as an antiseptic cream, then I consider it scientific. So I think it is a question which goes beyond the significance of research funding. It is also a question about acknowledging multiple sites of knowledge production, multiple forms of knowledge, and not treating one at the cost of other. The last point I want to make is that in recent years, we have been struggling in our country to explore how Ministry of Higher Education could support partnerships in research, the kind of things that Canadians have done, you are doing, etc. You know, all these models of science shop all over Europe. And I was in a task force which made the plans for the next plan, and hopefully that will be funded in a couple of months, we will know. The theme was strengthening community engagement in higher education. And the initial framework provided by the government of strengthening that engagement was, as many people said, you also said, the third mission. You first do your own research, then you do your own teaching, and then if you have some time left, go and fool around in the community a little bit. No. The argument we have made in that policy is that community engagement has to be central to research and teaching. Universities and institutions of higher education must integrate the perspectives of communities, both in research and teaching. It is unfortunate that experts in the community, ecological experts, water harvesting experts, Ayurveda experts, yoga experts, are never invited to teach in the university. And somebody who is 27-year-old, got a PhD in yoga science, never practiced it himself, is teaching yoga. The best artisans who produce, woodworking with carvings, and and even the best musicians, who none of them have any PhD, they cannot be teachers of music in universities because they don't have the qualification. So we set the qualification and we define who can teach, we define who can do research. I want to submit that in our exploration of engagement and partnership, we put integration within the research and teaching function of the university as the heart of it, not outside it. And finally, if I may request my fellow colleagues from Europe, including the colleague from European Union, universities, you, others, that your governments are doing wonderful work in supporting science-society dialogues, civil society partnerships in Europe, but we are living in a global world. Other ministries of your governments, other ministries and departments of European Union, other other departments of your multinational companies are financing research through a variety of other mediums in the global south where this approach is delegitimized. World Bank is funded by you, United Nations agencies are funded by you, BMZ is funded by you, DFID is funded by you, European Union's development cooperation is funded by you, all of it is funded by European publics. But in those streams of your work, nobody is talking about science and citizen, civil society partnership. Those streams of work which you fund, which other side of your ministries and governments fund, continues to be carried forward, whether it is research or support to higher education development, entirely in the way as it was 30 years ago in Europe. Maybe you can talk to your colleagues in your ministries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajesh. Also that you have, I'm very grateful that you reminded us again between this relation between something what is maybe very local, what seems to us very small, and what is in fact always linked to something very global in our globalized world. And you spoke also about democratic accountability and the problem it faces in Asia, but I think you are not alone with this problem, unfortunately. I mean, what do we know about budgets of military research in our countries, and when is it discussed in our parliaments and so on? So we have also still a lot of questions we have to clarify in terms of democratic accountability and democratic functioning. And I also thank you to have asked the question about if research and innovation have to serve economic growth, because I think this is really also something we have to deal with as a science shop movement, as a community-based research movement, and yeah, never to forget that when we speak about research and knowledge, that we speak about men and women and children and our daily life, and that we speak about the relation and the place of different knowledge in our society today, and what vision we have, where we want to go with our society. So maybe it is about a paradigm shift concerning the missions and the modes of work in public research. So, I mean, we were anyway late already when we started the plenary, so we are still late, of course. The floor is open, so I imagine there are some reactions. So I would propose that we take several presentations from the public, and then if we have still the time, we come back to our speaker. And maybe present always yourself. It's always good to know who speaks.
Neubauer, Charles University Environment Center. I have one substantial question. For me, this science policy debate is slightly crazy, because good science for me is not only about answers, but also about research questions. Yes, and our science is used to be deliver very much answers, but still less used to ask proper questions. And this science community interaction is all about teaching science to pose these questions. Otherwise, if we apply this science, which is only able to deliver answers to democratic dialogue, then democratic dialogue obviously would crash. So it's like, I think it's a chance for science, not for community, or as well for community, but the first place for science.
Any other comments?
Hi, my name is Peter Levesque. I run a company in Ottawa, Canada called Knowledge Mobilization Works. I'm struck by how similar the conversations we're having today are to they were at the Loka Institute conference in 1999, and how difficult this change process is. And so I'm wondering if some of the panelists can talk to the challenge of changing and developing policy and its relationships with power. And I want to contrast that concept of power by suggesting that the paradigm that's happening globally is that a movement from knowledge is power to sharing is power. If you think of the largest capitalized companies that have emerged over the last 5 years, I won't go any further than that, they're Google, Facebook, Apple, and they all consisted of sharing their API code so that thousands and thousands of companies, including companies in India, could develop applications. The power of that sharing process is enormous. I'm working with a social gaming company right now where the game that we have on Facebook averages about 11.5 million users a day, and we average revenue from players on the game of about 8 cents a day. So you think 8 cents is nothing? Times it by 11.5 million people playing, that's about $920,000 revenue a day. So out of that, what we're also producing is one of the largest data sets. This is an environmental complex problem solving game. Out of that, we actually create one of the largest data sets about individual decision-making behavior related to environmental problems. And we're in negotiation with the top 10 environmental organizations in Canada right now to how do we turn that data set over to them to affect policy, to affect programs, to affect changes in perspective, to lead to new people skills, to lead to new products, to lead to new processes, to lead to new professional development. So I'd like some response to that question of between the creation of policy and how the complex problems remain, and there's a relationship to power, and that there's this massive paradigm shifting globally between the holders of knowledge traditionally and those that create the platforms to share, and how that affects power.
Other remarks or comments, questions? It's the moment to do it. If not, I think we have two quite challenging questions. So
maybe I can start with challenging this discourse that we have science on the one hand, which is obviously not transparent and not pluralistic, and then we have democracy on the other hand, which has no access to knowledge or science. I don't think this is really a dichotomy that exists. Maybe in developing countries where you don't really have a knowledge society, but certainly not in Germany, where you have in your basic law the freedom of research and education. So you still have a pluralistic and transparent research and education agenda within the universities. I have to state this because sometimes it sounds like, only if you open yourself up to questions from your local neighbor, you have a sort of democratic legitimacy to do your research. That is not quite the way I consider research in Germany. Still, I think research is about asking questions. It's not about delivering answers. Yeah? I mean, good research is asking questions. If you have an answer, you ask the next questions. Yeah? But the question is, in which context do you actually form this discourse where you raise questions? And you can do that within your scientific community, which is certainly necessary to have high-end research, but you can also open up to other questions. And what these big companies that have developed within the past years have seen is that the more diverse your basis of creating knowledge is, the more successful you are on the market. The less hierarchy you have in asking questions and answering questions, yeah. And these companies are they have a very small hierarchy. The more successful you are, the more people you involve in creating your business and in developing your business, in sharing your ideas, shared software and stuff like that, the more successful you are. I think this is more or less what is research all about. Yeah? And if researchers think like that, in the way of and even companies think like that now. Yeah, the way companies interact with universities have totally changed over the past years. They don't have a single university where they have a contract with and now give me the answer to my question. No, they have crowdsourcing and crowdfunding systems. Like, I have a question, I write the question in the internet, and it opens up to all research facilities in the world. I'll give you $500,000 if you can provide the answer. And who provides the answers? Totally irrelevant. Might be an Indian researcher, might be a researcher in Malaysia, might be one in Northern Ireland. This is the way innovative companies have developed their research system now. And I think that more or less relates to the developments that you are discussing here, that you open up to questions that are around your sphere of activities.
Yeah, that was a very interesting question about this shift of power, but I think what one shouldn't underestimate is that for the ordinary citizen, I think many questions remain as complex and as difficult to understand as they were before. It doesn't matter that now the solution was generated by a different process, including thousands of people all around the world. Still, many people don't understand why Google and Facebook are so successful, how they can generate so much money, how they can influence or how they can oppose this sort of new power that has been generated. So I think we should still be watchful, even though we have a different process of generating knowledge. And I think that what is, at least from a sort of policy point of view, what is most important is that people still believe, and people who govern us still believe, that there are no questions that are too complex for ordinary citizens. And that the key of democracy is that everyone can participate and influence decisions, and that we don't arrive at living in a society where we say, oh, there are so many questions that are just too complicated, too large, they just have to be decided by just a small group of people, they're not accessible for everyone. And I think this challenge still remains, even in a society where knowledge is generated differently.
I think in many parts of the world, perhaps less so in Europe, if you look at what is going on in expansion of higher education in Asia, the pace of enrollment, the exponential growth in number of providers, and there's a big debate going on the question of is higher education a public good or a private good? Should it be financed with public resources or with private resources? I don't know how much of that debate is going on in Germany or in Europe, but seems like much of higher education in Germany, at least, is publicly funded. Now, when in our region, when public resources are applied to institutions of higher education, research institutions, etc., there is a larger question, because those public resources are diverted from, there is an opportunity cost of not applying them to something else, because the pie is limited. Of course, it is growing with tax revenue growing, but there are always important choices being made. You apply public funding to higher education, to research, and and you don't apply it to literacy, you don't apply it to cleaning up your environment, etc., whatever. So within this issue of public financing of research, there is a larger question of social accountability, societal accountability. That question does not imply that people working on nuclear technology catch hold of some fellow's driving cycle and say, what do you think of nuclear technology? That's not the way the answer will come. But it demands of those who are making decisions about public funding of research, it demands of those to define how social accountability will be ensured. And the challenge for that is to define social responsibility of research. Because without defining that, you cannot create the criteria for accountability. What's the purpose of research? Is the purpose of research to improve the lives of people? Will that improvement take place in the lives of all people or some of the all people? Will that improvement take place in the next 10 years or next 500 years? Those are the questions which become important to identify when public financing, public resources are being used. I'm mentioning this because there is a very interesting opportunity, and in the course of next 2-3 days, we will have some conversations with those of you who are interested, that Dr. Bud Hall and I have been invited by UNESCO to co-chair a UNESCO chair on community-based research and social responsibility of higher education. And we want to explore what are the different models and methods that, are being developed in different parts of the world, including here in Europe, on how social responsibility of higher education, both in its education role as well as in its research role, knowledge building role, are being performed. But these questions are being asked, and these questions in our region cannot be avoided for too long.
I suppose I wanted to speak to the question of, I guess, whether we're making progress with some of this. And I mean, I think it is probably fair to say, yes, some of the questions we're asking are still the same as the questions we were asking a number of years ago. But what I would say is we're asking the hard questions, we're not asking the easy questions. And if you ask the hard questions, you don't necessarily expect to have solved them or resolved them in the space of 5 or 10 years. It's going to be an ongoing process. It's going to be something that you're going to work at year after year. And yes, sometimes you get dispirited and sometimes it's a difficult thing to keep going with it. But sometimes you make gains as well. And I guess overall, when you look, you have to say, well, are things moving in the direction that we want to see them moving? And, not necessarily that you get everything you want, but do you get some bits of what you want? And I suppose from my perspective, I would say I do think that we are making gains. I think 10 or 15 years, if you're thinking about the culture change that we're thinking about, 10 or 15 years is not a long time, given the predominant paradigm of knowledge for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think, it's ambitious to think that we would have met those goals in that time frame. But I mean, certainly I feel in terms of things like, for example, some of the science and society, some of the work that they've been doing being mainstreamed now into the 2020 work, in terms of the work that UK funders are doing, I can see that there is movement. I can see that things are progressing, albeit at a slower pace probably than people would like. And I mean, I suppose the thing that I would say is, coming back to my point that policy development's for everyone, we are all advocates for what we do. We are all out there talking to people and making these points, and I guess it's throwing the challenge back in a way and saying, if we want to make progress on these agendas, then we need to continue to do that. We need to continue to go out and explain to people what the value and the purpose of it is. And yes, sometimes we'll step back and think, we've been doing this for a long time. Have we moved? I think yes, we have actually. I think we've made progress, and I think we'll continue to make progress.
I would like to propose to you that this was a very nice conclusion of this plenary. If there is not another burning question or comment, then let's take a coffee and think about these last words and share them.